Hi, hello everyone. Thanks for being here. And this is our presentation on what's happening in Europe for crypto and Web3 and the likes, etc., etc. Welcome. A quick word of introduction. EUCI, we are a crypto organization that does basically lobbying work and think tanks at the EU level. So the idea is to bring awareness on all the innovative use cases of crypto to the EU institutions. Let's start without further ado. The idea of this talk is to bring you a broad overview of what's been happening in the crypto space, for the crypto space, concerning the crypto space at the EU level, and then what's coming next. So let's start with Mika. You probably heard about Mika. It's the big regulation that the trilogues or the EU institutions recently finalized. And basically it regulates all the centralized entities that are dealing with crypto. That's the objective. The exchanges, custodians, issuers of crypto assets, and stablecoins. So that's basically the scope. Everything is quite heavily regulated. There's licenses required. There's white paper obligation if you want to issue a new crypto asset. So it's quite a burdensome regulation for all the centralized entities. What's outside of the scope of this regulation is theoretically DeFi, so the decentralized use cases, NFTs, DAOs, and bridge and wrapped assets. But very important thing to have in mind is that we don't have the final version of the text, so we have the broad direction where the text is going and the political compromises, as we name them. So we know basically where the text is going, but we don't have the final text. And sometimes, you know, the devil is in the details. And basically, all those exemptions, they are drafted in a way such as you have to determine really if, for example, for DeFi, how decentralized are you, right? And depending on the final drafting of the exemption, there's things to look at. So I would advise any project that deals with this, which is basically all projects, to have a look at the final text and maybe contact us, or we can discuss around the final version that should come out officially at the beginning of next year and unofficially in probably a month or so. The whole text will be applicable in 18 to 24 months, so there's still time to anticipate and to look at what's happening, but it's long and it's quite short at the same time. So this is for basically the broad regulation of crypto assets, and at the same time there's another one, very funny one, that you probably heard about too. It's the anti-money laundering regulation. So basically, there's a few amendments that made a lot of noise in the crypto asset community regarding this travel rule for crypto asset, which mandates every centralized entity to collect and to transmit information about the customers, about the transaction to other entities, which is, of course, a huge regulatory burden, but also a huge privacy risk for European citizens. So that's something we are not very happy about. In addition, there's no minimum thresholds for data collection. There's some data protection issues. Of course, I just said it, and necessary client verification for unhosted wallets, which is practically very complicated, and we don't really know how it will be implemented. So, not so good regulation. We have a bit of comments on that, and likewise, it will be applicable in 18 to 24 months from there. So there's still a bit of time, and we are also still waiting for the final version. So still ongoing on the final draft. So all in all, what's been happening, is this bad? I think we think there's positive and negative. Positive, this is the EU-wide recognition of crypto assets, of the importance of the crypto assets and the crypto activities, of DeFi, of all the things that basically we are building. So this is a good thing in a way, because this means that institutions, private companies, big companies will look at crypto in a more like normalized way. It won't be like a fringe thing, but more like a normal thing, which has good sides and bad sides, of course, as you know. And crypto assets service providers can be licensed all across the EU with a unified regime. So there's, only need to regulate in one place, and you are regulated in the whole of Europe. So it's a simplification from what's been happening before, where you had to regulate in every single country, one by one, basically. The minus side, basically, is very simple. There's a legal uncertainty for all projects experimenting with decentralized the governance or decentralized protocols in general. We've seen that we don't have the final wording for the DeFi exemption. Even if we had the final wording, it will probably not be very precise as to define what is decentralized and what not. So this is still something that we will have to work with. And there's an extremely stringent regulation on stablecoins. That's the worst probably that we could have, ignoring the different designs and functionality of notably the decentralized stablecoins, which is not, basically the regulation was built to fight against Libra. So it's really been the focus from the beginning, and they went all through the end. So good side is that the stablecoins will be really included inside of the regulation. The bad side is that there's not a lot of actors that will be big enough and have a sufficient size to deal with the whole complexity of this regulation. And that's it for what's been happening. Passing the mic to Marina.
So what's coming next? We know that Mika has been, in a way, in Brussels, discussed in Brussels for the last 2 years, and we have another 2 years until it will be applicable. So what is happening? You probably heard about, what Simon said was on the documentary level, but what will happen in practice? What will happen when you will want to have a license as a project? The important thing is that the national competent authorities, they're going to have a lot of say into, are you getting a license or not? And also, in a way, de facto, they're going to define what is in the scope of Mika and what's not in the scope of Mika, which means that is especially important for decentralized projects and for NFTs. NFTs have been defined in Mika, and the definition says that they should be unique and non-fungible. What is also very important is that they should be not fractionable. And I think this is, we all understand what this means. We'll see how the national competent authorities are going to basically interpret this in the next years. What is also very important is what's coming next. Are we having a Mika 3? You probably heard about Lagarde and European Central Bank issuing opinions on Mika, issuing opinions on crypto assets and stablecoins. But I think what is really, really important is that we understand that the European Central Bank is not a legislator, which means that they cannot start the procedure for, let's say, a new Mika 2 that might regulate DeFi. So what is important is to look into the Commission and what the Commission plan is and what the Commission is going to do. As you know, all the institutions, they have a mandate, so Brussels also works in cycles. The Commission's mandate is going to end quite soon, in a year and a half. And so within this mandate, we do not expect new regulations that are linked to crypto, but we can expect new ones with a new mandate. So what can we do in between? We definitely want to be more proactive than just reactive, and I'll explain a little bit about this later. But just to give you an overview to what's coming, there's not going to be yet Mika 2, but what is happening in Brussels at the moment is we're going to have a new data protection regulation, a new tax reporting regulation. There's going to be consultations around DeFi, even a potential sandbox around DeFi. But what is important is that there has been an increased activity from international organizations like IOSCO, FATF, OECD. Also, the Bank of International Settlement has issued a lot of opinions on DeFi, and the magic word in the next years is definitely DeFi. So everyone wants to issue opinions, write standards, and that's definitely going to influence also the potential regulation on DeFi that is coming from Brussels. What we can do, or what we want to do, what we are saying, our narrative is it's not a duck, which means that decentralized use cases are not similar to centralized use cases. And what we want to do is speak their own language. So wherever you are at the regulatory panel, they usually say, oh, you know, if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, then it's a duck. So we should regulate DeFi in the same way as we're regulating financial institutions and financial, in a way, service providers. But what we are saying, it's not the same. We have seen this with Celsius, we have seen this with a lot of different centralized organizations versus how, in a way, smart contracts operate and how DeFi operates. So we are launching this campaign, and we're going to be tweeting about it's not a duck, and basically speaking about this and forcing, in a way, this narrative in a discussion.
Yeah, so to close this off, it's good that you all came, and the room is relatively full. That shows that more and more people care about what's happening in Brussels. Now, decentralization is something that brings us all together here, I believe, and we all know it's real. We took over the job of speaking on behalf of all of us in Brussels, explaining the benefits of decentralization for all the individuals, but also the future of Europe as a global economy. However, I think there's also a duty of us as a space, because if we look at DAO participation numbers in governance today, if we look at how certain protocols are run, we know that we can do better in terms of how we actually practice decentralization, right? All of us individually know where things are maybe not as great as they could be. And if we don't get there on our own, we have to expect very stringent regulation from Brussels that basically says decentralization is a mirage. It's just an excuse to evade traditional regulation and so on and so forth. So we really need to step up. We also need to show non-financial use cases of crypto. We really need to push digital identity, for example, and things like that to show that not everything needs to be regulated as a financial instrument, right? All of this stuff is yet out to be proven. So what we can do, and all of us can do, is get better at communication, reach out for dialogue with regulators. They are not monsters, they're actually humans with an information asymmetry problem. Let's do more research. Let's fund research groups all over the world. Let's make actually practical proposals for what could a sandbox for DeFi actually look like. What could a potential, you know, anti-money laundering regulation that is privacy preserving but yet effective, or much more effective than what we have today, look like, that uses DeFi principles, and so on. So there's a lot of things, I think, to innovate on together, both with regulators, lawyers, and developers. So I also hope that we may see some hackathons this or next year around hacking, you know, privacy preserving compliance solutions for DeFi and so on. Let's make this a movement. I didn't make that slide, but okay. Maybe. I would say let's save it all together. Lawyers are a part of the conversation at this point, but I think it needs all of our brains. We are optimistic, I would say. Marina, maybe. So Marina is the executive director of the EUCI, so maybe you want to, you know, spread the optimism a little bit.
Thank you. I think just for the end of this presentation, I need to say that we have really seen that this movement is a community. We've seen so many people supporting us. Also, volunteering for this movement, working with us, trying to share ideas on how we can improve. We are going to do this in the future. We are going to scale and work more on those ideas, do more research as it was discussed, and just thanking everyone for being involved and for supporting us. Thank you.
Is there any questions?
Thank you. Hi, thank you. Do you have any idea about what's going on in the UK with this? It's also in Europe, I think.
So yes, but also not in too much detail. I think since this is being recorded, we should be very careful what kind of opinion we now say. So no, we're not really focused on the UK, but we do believe that the UK, due to its special position now relative to the EU, will try to potentially compete in a positive and constructive way, such that there is a dialogue maybe, and EU can learn maybe from the UK and vice versa. That would be my optimistic plan. But yeah, I don't know. I know that there are a lot of crypto companies who have a headquarter in the UK, so they all believe. I think there's a strong lobby. But yeah, that's very general. I cannot say much more.
Just maybe adding that the general messaging from the UK has been very, very positive recently, but we haven't seen any practical and concrete proposal around this messaging yet. So.
Thank you very much, EUCI guys, for your presentation and for all the work, the very important work that you are doing for the community. You mentioned stablecoin regulations, very stringent stablecoin regulations. What do you think would be, in your opinion, the implications for a project like MakerDAO that is a decentralized issuer, could have a very hard time complying with these regulations? What could be the implications for a project like Maker?
We've been raising the alarm regarding decentralized stablecoins from the beginning, because the scope of the regulation was so broad that it encompassed all the stablecoins. We understand now that it was actually an objective. So as of today, except for the DeFi exemption, where we still have to see the exact wording, there's a very, very high risk that DAI is captured and then regulated as a centralized entity, which of course doesn't make sense and has the effect that the stablecoin would be illegal inside of EU, because it would not be able to, it could not respect the obligations, basically. The consequences of that, the practical consequences of that, you can, as an individual, use DeFi products and you're not inside of the scope of the regulation. So if you have your own wallet and you use, I don't know, a CDP to create DAI, that's probably fine, but not sure about that. We'll have to see at the final version. But what's for sure is that all the centralized entities in Europe will be prohibited from touching DAI, which, of course, may be an issue for DAI. This is still up to discussion, and we have to also to see what will be the practical approach of this, notably DeFi exemption by the EU regulators. But yeah, we are not extremely positive on that, because one of the big objectives of the regulation was to crack down on stablecoins. Yeah.
Maybe just to add, like the CASPs are, the crypto as a service providers are regulated, so exchanges are extremely regulated. Whatever they're going to list on the centralized exchanges, it needs to be verified. And even like there was a discussion around Bitcoin as not having an issuer there. Centralized exchanges will probably need to write a white paper explaining why they are listing Bitcoin on the exchange. I mean, this is still not sure because we don't have the last draft of the text yet, but that is the logic. Like in a way, centralized exchanges are the door to crypto.
Hey, thanks guys for the presentation. I just want to ask, what do you think is the best way for non-lawyers to, well, help you guys or help push for more, proper regulation?
Thank you. So I think the most important thing is to come together and do more research. This is going to be our focus, especially for the next 6 months. We're going to write 2 reports on DeFi and stablecoins and issue them around December. So whoever is interested in writing, researching, sharing information, it's very welcome. And of course, we also need financial support. So whoever wants to donate, different projects that want to help us, just reach out.
I just want to take the occasion to thank all the people that have helped us on the last KitCon ground. It's been amazing, and thank you very much, everyone. Also, if you are a project like a company or a DAO or anything, and you want to be more involved, you can reach out to us, and we have like a membership structure for actual projects. So don't hesitate to contact us.
Hi. Two questions. First, thanks for educating the politician about the difference between DeFi and CeFi. But how do you draw the line between like how much decentralized it is? For like MakerDAO is a good example. And the second question is, if you define something as decentralized, let's still use the MakerDAO example, but it uses some centralized collateral like USDC that can be confiscated. What impact it will have, do you think, on those decentralized protocols? Thanks.
Thank you. This is the core question. We don't have a definition of decentralization in Mika. In general, they say that decentralized organizations, DeFi, are excluded from the scope, but we don't know what is decentralization. So when we speak to them, in a way, many times they say, oh, it's a very nice theoretical concept, but in practice, we don't think that there's a lot of decentralized projects out there. And last time we had a discussion, they said, but you know, like I wouldn't want to look at Terra as a decentralized project. So, you know, it would not be in the scope, so we would not regulate. So, you know, all these things that happened, the consequences would not be linked to a liability. But then we said, you know, we're not talking about Terra, we're talking about, I don't know, other DAOs, ENS DAO, and other DAOs that are more decentralized. So there needs to be more education, and we're going to see how this will evolve, especially with the involvement of the national competent authorities and ESMA, some other agencies that are involved in the process. And what you asked about is, in a way, DeFi is a Lego, composed by different applications, and that is going to be extremely, I would say, interesting and challenging. Even, I mean, if we think about the centralized world and finance, there needs to be, in a way, contracts between companies and service providers. You mostly, I mean, evaluate if what they do is legal and compliant, and if they have a license. So that will probably be the case with centralized entities. So the decentralized ones will live in a different world, and there are like legal implications, there are business implications, there are liquidity implications to this, and it will have, like, I would say, a really important spillover effect. We talked about this now with, you know, the recent developments in the last weeks, but Mika is the first regulation in the world and also in Europe for like an overarching regulation for crypto. So that is definitely going to have an effect in how we build the system.
Hi. I'm interested if you've already talked about the things like what MakerDAO is doing or Aave is going to do with real-world collateralization, real-world assets. So how do you bridge that gap and you make it the link strong enough so that it holds?
So we think that's a really positive signal that an institutional player like Société Générale or others are trying out this way of securitization, lending. I think this can actually demonstrate to regulators that there is a real utility. So we think this is great. There are also developments by some protocols like Aave who try out some kind of pro version of the protocol that is just for institutional players, playing with concepts of KYC identities on chain. So this is in general also a direction we need to, I think, research much more. So overall, I think those are positive movements. there is, talk about maybe, so there was a pilot regime already around the Mika regulation for institutional players using blockchains as a settlement layer. And now there are talks about a potential pilot regime in the DeFi space, right? So there could be some equivalent regulation allowing institutionals using those decentralized protocols if there are some guarantees, I suppose, around the identities that can do stuff there. So this is what I meant with let's research some privacy-preserving technology that can, bring those worlds together in a meaningful way. I think that would actually help us out of this impasse that we're in right now, where regulators think we cannot comply, we think they don't get us. Let's just build something that convinces everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.